Brian, are we good?
Yes, are we good? Okay, well, oh, we don't know yet?
Well, he's here.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good. Okay. In that case, then I will call the November 9th, 2022 meeting of the Ojai Building Appeals Board to order. Can we get the roll call, please?
Yes. Bob Daddy.
Present.
Tom Farmer.
Here.
Bill Ulrich.
Here.
Myself, Dale Hansen. And Renaud Rollet is not here,
Okay,
but we do have a quorum.
we have a quorum. Okay,
I'm just
very
gonna, one thing, Mr. Chair. Let's make sure we speak into the microphones, so that we have it for the
The
record.
only one that wasn't on is when I called Bob Daddy, and Bob Daddy is here. Okay, sorry about that.
I'm sorry, mine was on, but
I'm just reminding, because we just want to have
We
a
had a little
clear
problem
clear
with that
record.
last time, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, can we do then the Pledge of Allegiance, Tom?
we can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. Okay. Public communications. Is the time set aside during the Building Appeals Board meeting for members of the public to address the Building Appeals Board on items of city business other than the scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the board and will generally be referred to staff and or placed on a subsequent agenda. Under state law, other than for emergency items, no action can be taken at this meeting. Do we have any public communications? Any speaker cards? Anything of that? Okay.
Chair Quillisi, I imagine you fixed this. Did you prepare this for us? Would you like to make any comments and offer any explanations on any of the portion of this while you're here?
Very good.
You know, the more we can keep our city engaged in what's actually happening,
Oh,
I think the better off we are.
I did notice that I'm last on the agenda, but I'm happy to go early. At the last meeting, I gave you a sheet that said, what's up with the building, with the planning commission since your last meeting? And that covered a lot of things. This one, I have given you an update that shows the 3 meetings that we have had since your last meeting. And you can see by the dates there, we have dealt with affordable housing overlay, general progress on programs that are part of the general plan housing element, and we established 2 ad hoc committees, one on affordable housing, one on parking. We don't have reports back from those ad hoc committees yet, but we're hoping for something soon. Other than that, it's pretty much standard business. We approved a detached 2-story garage and home office on Del Norte. We did a little housekeeping on the code, moving the VMU development standards and land use permissions from Article 5 to Article 6 of Title 10, so that the VMU is now in the special purpose districts portion of Title 10 rather than in the residential districts portion of Title 10. And
No,
just,
excuse me, no other
Yes.
changes, substantial changes to
we
the-
did not make any changes to the code, we just moved it.
Okay.
That was the request from the city council. And so we just lifted the text from Article 5 and moved it to Article 6.
And what was the underlying impetus for that request?
I'm sorry, it was not from residential, it was from commercial and manufacturing to special purpose zoning districts. And the argument there was that VMU includes residential, and that's inappropriate to the commercial and manufacturing districts portion of the zoning code. And while it does a number of things, the VMU is kind of a special purpose district. So it made sense to just move the text from one place to another.
And if you wouldn't mind, because I'm still confused on this.
Sure.
We had somebody that attempted to repurpose an eyeglass office to
Yes.
a duplex, and because of parking, it ended up being just a single unit.
A
And
single live-work unit instead of a duplex with one of them being a live-work unit, basically.
right, and what part of that parking was that? Did the parking portion of that come out of the commercial, or did the parking? I couldn't imagine a parking portion coming out of the residential, but
No.
but
it-
how did they get a special designation for parking that it seems like? I know it's a special purpose, but nobody seems to have.
The requirement for parking that more or less broke the deal, as I understood it, forced the applicant to go to a single living unit instead of two, was the requirement in commercial districts that for up to 25 parking spaces to service a commercial enterprise, you have to have at least one handicapped space.
And now that it's a special purpose and it's in its own
No
box.
different.
Okay, so that's still gonna go. That's still gonna go with the
Right.
special purpose.
Right.
Is there any thought of the planning commission making a recommendation that be modified and then have that portion put back into residential?
Have the parking portion
Have the
put back
parking
in the
portion
residential?
put into the residential, because what we did was we eliminated an extra live unit
Yes, we
in
did.
an area that's downtown, perfect for walking, right next to the farmer's market. It'd been there for 40 years. It had adequate parking for 40 years. And then all of a sudden we say, nope.
In fact, there were two commercial enterprises in the building. And whenever the building went up, whenever it was reviewed by the planning commission back in the day, the parking that was there, which was about 4 spaces, none of them handicapped, was deemed sufficient for those two commercial enterprises. The laws changed. Now, if you want to do something different with the building, then you have to look at the current land use and parking and whatever requirements in the code.
Okay. And will the special use have any of the same benefits as commercial? Which is, we have a restaurant across the street that has no parking, but they get to use the farmer's market parking, and some other ones get to use off-site parking. And so will we extend that to these ADUs or these other conversions to where if the proximity is next to a public parking where we allow commercial, will we now allow this special purpose to have the same benefits as a strictly commercial?
I don't know about other commercial enterprises that are allowed to use city-owned parking spaces and count them against the requirement for parking to service that commercial unit. If there is something like that, I would love to have the details on it. It was all before the time that I was on the planning commission. But if one group is allowed to count city-owned parking spaces as part of their required parking, then it only seems fair that everybody get to do that.
Not to single them out,
No.
but I believe Ojai Roti has one parking place. I believe the Duchess, we're talking about people using street parking. We have the new little restaurant next to the Playhouse that has 0 parking. We have the Marché, which is the deli next to that has 0 parking. And so it seems that food and other places get to use by proximity parking places, and I'm just a little frustrated that when it comes to residential, there's an exclusion.
An exclusion.
Well, there's extra requirements that aren't added on to some of our commercial venues. And it appears to me that I think residential should have a priority. Anyhow, it just,
Okay.
it's
No,
just a thought when you start getting
understand.
into the parking.
The, I look forward to hearing back from our ad hoc committee on parking. The other thing that I would say is that whenever the law changes, whether it's municipal code or state law or somewhere else, that law governs future behavior unless it includes provisions for retroactivity. The other businesses that you mentioned, particularly next to the Playhouse and next to the Playhouse, have had those land uses for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but either they are doing something that was not allowed when they established that land use, or what they have done in terms of having little or no parking was legal at the time that they established that land use. And if that's the case, then they don't have to constantly change their behavior when the law changes. If the law doesn't say this requirement is retroactive to January 1st, 1901, or whatever. And so if somebody changes a land use, then they have to comply with the law at the time that they make that change.
And what if you have a 5-year break in use? Is there any point in time where you say, God, you haven't been open as a restaurant for 5 or 6 years?
Legally, it's 6 months. If you are not actively engaged in the permitted land use, then you have to start over. As I understand it in the code, you have to reapply for that land use in that place. The Playhouse, I have been told, is different because since the flood, they have been in the process of repairing the property. And so the 6-month clock paused when they began repairs. Now, if they get back to where the Playhouse is fully functional, and they've gotten a certificate of occupancy, or a whatever corresponds to that for a commercial business, and then they don't use the land for that use for 6 months, then that CUP or that permitted use or whatever, no, not a permitted, but a CUP then would expire, as I understand it.
Steve, you mean using the land as far as parking?
No, using the land that, in this case, we'll talk about the Playhouse. Using the parcel that the Playhouse is on as a theater. Because actually, theater is not a permitted use in the commercial zone.
That's right.
And that's where the Playhouse is. But it was there before that rule was made.
Right.
And so as long as they continue to use it as a theater and don't stop using it as a theater for 6 months, understanding the clock is stopped right now while they're fixing it, then they remain legal non-conforming.
Yeah, at one time, Los Padres Bank had an agreement with the movie theater that they would allow them to park in their parking lot.
After 5 o'clock or whatever,
5
yeah,
o'clock, right.
okay.
And I think Barbara Bowman still owns that parking behind the movie theater, I believe now, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay,
And at one time, she had an agreement too with the Playhouse for parking. I don't know
Well,
about that
that's-
restaurant.
If there was an agreement for shared use or whatever of parking, and that has expired, and that was a requirement of setting up the theater in the first place, then that should be looked into.
Yeah.
If they are, once they start using the theater as a theater again, if they are not complying with all the conditions set out in the CUP when they first set it up, then that ought to be looked into.
Yeah.
I would agree.
And would this apply also to the lot on Pearl Street that is about 25 years past its CUP? That project that's coming up, is that,
There,
does that start over?
are you
as a
talking about the parcel at Pearl and Fulton or at Pearl and Bald?
Pearl, no, excuse me, Olive and Grand.
Olive and Grant. Oh, okay, okay.
And so I believe what, that CUP's 25 years old, that thing hasn't been actively used, and we renewed the permit decade after decade, when there was
well,
actually no work done on that
A
property.
CUP, when granted, goes with the property.
Okay,
And I don't know right now whether using the property as dictated by the CUP for a portion of the property, but not all of the property, I don't know what the legal ramifications are of that.
it appears now it's a change of use totally different than what the original CUP for.
Not senior housing?
Well, it was an expansion of assisted care was what my understanding was. Now we're talking,
Okay,
and again, it would matter.
we'll have to see the case when it comes up, and it will come up in the next couple of meetings.
Good, thank you.
In fact, one of our commissioners will have to recuse herself.
Because she lives
She
there.
lives on Olive Street. But I expect to hear from staff as to what the legal ramifications are. You can have a CUP, you can begin to develop the property, let's say, in compliance with the CUP. I am not currently aware of any time limit on when you must finish developing the project or the property with all of the conditions of the CUP. And to my understanding, there is no prohibition of requesting a change to a CUP.
Okay,
And if that is what the ask is when the case comes up, then we'll have to look at it from that point of view. I don't know right now because I haven't seen a staff report, but we'll look at it when it comes up.
and I would have one other item on the back page.
Sure.
It's related and totally unrelated at the same time. It really has nothing to do with the denial of a gas meter. It has to do with the question of a gas meter. Has the city gotten around to establishing will serve letter for all utilities and water now as a requirement prior to the planning commission looking at projects?
As I understand it, they do. And the utilities would be electric, gas, water, sewer.
Fire, trash.
Okay? I don't know about fire and trash.
Well,
The fire protection
Hydrant.
district has its own rules about access.
okay.
And a Form 610B or whichever, I think it's a Form 610B from the Fire Protection District, is a requirement before an application is deemed complete. About trash, I don't know. I don't know if they're regarded as a utility or if they are something else. Don't know.
In Ojai, I don't know. In San Luis Obispo, in Pismo, in Santa Maria, in 6 other cities, they built houses. Yeah, they were all requirement.
The item, you mentioned an appeal. That will be coming up on the 16th, a week from tonight. And we'll get a staff report on that. But as I have been told, this is a project, and you probably all familiar with that portion of Topa Topa. It's the little stub off of Montgomery next to the car wash. At the far west end of that, on the south side of the street, was an empty lot. And the owner of that lot came before the Planning Commission some time ago. I don't remember the date, but it was, I think, within the last year. And asked to put up a 2-story main residence, including a junior ADU, and a separate ADU between the main residence and the street. Okay. And the appeal is of a request to have a gas meter. The REACH code that was passed by the city council has no exceptions for residential property. And so, by city council dictate, they cannot have any gas appliances on that property. Has to be all
Can
electric.
I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
What if they want a gas fireplace in the backyard, or some kind of outdoor gas? I mean, can't they?
Have to go back and read the REACH code. That's in Title IX, Chapter 1.
Right, I think it's in our,
And
I don't think they can have a gas line running to the property.
well, it says all electric, and that's
Right.
pretty clear as I read it.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's what it's.
I don't know how you would have an electric fireplace, but, I mean,
Well-
I've seen electric fireplaces. It's a light behind
Yeah.
a piece of film that looks like flame.
What's interesting is the county just passed they passed what we're doing tonight. And what they did was they passed some exceptions to gas. Pool, spa, fire ring, and a number of other things. And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of like having a hole in your pocket and letting the gold dust fall out. It just didn't seem to make sense, but they're the county, so what can I say?
That's two different legislative bodies taking different approaches to the same problem.
Absolutely, and so I guess since we're on it, that means putting a pool in, you will not be allowed to have a gas-fired water heater for your pool or spa.
Or anywhere else. I don't know about the instant on water heaters. All the ones that I've heard about, I have an electric line so that they turn on and off, and a gas line so that you get the heat. I don't know how you would do instant on all electric water heating. Unless you had some massive reverse radiator kind of thing. I don't know. Have you ever heard of that sort of thing? An all-electric, instant-on water heat?
They do. They have them. I don't know
Okay.
how efficient they are or how well they work.
Yeah.
But I do know they have them.
They're useless.
How much your electric bill is?
They also have electric tank water heaters. Because there
Oh,
are.
electric tank water heaters. Yeah, I can understand how you can keep a tank hot.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you can do instant hot with just electricity. Doesn't make sense, but who knows?
Well, they have the little ones in commercial installations right under a sink, and they work real well. And
Oh,
they make
okay.
them larger and larger, but you could have one that would service a shower, for example.
Okay,
So
Very good.
that technology exists, and it's been existing for a couple of decades anyway. But when you're talking about on a level of an entire house that will remain to be seen,
the whole
I'm sure it's
neighborhood goes
available, but
dim when you
cost
turn your
and-
hot water faucet on?
Yeah, cost and
The
electric,
block will dim,
yeah.
and I'm sure it's the size of a telephone booth.
Are there any other
Okay,
questions?
thank you very much. I really
actually-
appreciate
I
that.
actually have one, a generic one that goes back to the 10/5/22 meeting.
Yes, sir.
What is, if you could just describe in generally, general terms, the special overlay district for affordable housing?
Oh, okay, sure. This is in Title 10, Chapter 2, I think it's Article 7, but I'm not positive. It says that it talks about making property available for building affordable housing. Okay, so if you look in the current housing element of the general plan, you'll find a list of 6 or 8 or 10, something like that, parcels in the city that have this SPL overlay on them. That is additional restrictions or additional opportunities over and above the base zoning of that parcel. Some of those parcels are in residential districts, like the quarter acre up at Franklin and Montgomery. Others are commercially zoned property. There are parcels along Ojai Avenue immediately to the east of the school district property that have this SPL overlay. In this case, the American Legion was asking about an SPL overlay on what they have as 3 contiguous parcels there on East Ojai Avenue on the south side. And what happens is, if you request and you are granted a zoning change, basically, only the city council can do that, and you have an SPL overlay on the property, then if someone decides to develop the property with residences, and this at least seems kind of like a loophole in the code, I'm not sure, because an SPL overlay on a commercial piece of property, like right next to the school district, normally you cannot build residential properties there on a commercial property, a commercial zoned property. But I believe if you have the SPL overlay that you can, because that both adds and subtracts to what you can do with that parcel, but more importantly, it adds to the fact that you can develop affordable housing on that parcel. And if you do that, and enough of the units the residential units that you develop, you can get density bonuses and stuff like that. Plus you are allowing the city to claim to the State Housing and Community Development Department that the city has designated sufficient property within its jurisdiction that if anyone wants to develop affordable housing there, that the land and the processes for developing that land exist to make that possible. And that as succinctly as I can describe it is what the state requirement is. It is not that the city build anything. It is not that anyone else in particular, the property owners or any third party, there is no state requirement to develop affordable housing. It has to make business sense is what it amounts to. But the city's role in that is saying, yes, state HCD, we have sufficient property within our jurisdiction that if someone wants to build affordable housing, we have the capacity to absorb more than whatever our RENA number is for affordable housing. And of course, affordable is a strict legal black law definition. It's not the common wisdom that says affordable housing is where my gardener can live. It depends on how much your gardener makes.
Okay, very good, that's
Yeah.
all. Right, well, thank you.
Happy to help.
Thank you.
Incidentally, I mentioned in there updates, progress report on, progress on the general plan. I'll leave you one copy. That was, excuse me, I should be speaking over here. There are, if you look at the housing element of the general plan, there are a number of programs within the housing element, things that the city's committed to doing, allowing or actively doing. And that list of programs there is a report from the staff as to the amount of progress that they have made on each of those programs. And the hope is that you can finish all the programs within the 7 or 8 year cycle of the housing element. But if not, you know, you make best effort, I guess. The things that they've made the most progress on are website related and process related. There are others that are much more difficult, and you'll see much less progress on them so far.
And when did this initiate? What was the
This
start
is
date?
this is with the new, I think it's the 6th cycle, the 2021 through 2029 cycle.
Right, so that's where I was coming to, is so it actually started.
So this is
Last
progress since last year sometime. Actually, probably late last year, because it wasn't until July that the housing element was submitted to HCD, and it was in October, I think, that the city got back some comments on that, and they're still working that through. And the city is also required to do what they call APRs, annual progress reports, against all of the programs in the housing element. So, and that's out of the Planning Commission packet,
Yeah,
so,
very good.
okay?
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else I can do for you? Happy
No.
to do it.
You,
All right,
I think we saved you some time.
Yes,
okay.
I think I'll go have dinner.
You can go have dinner there. You.
Enjoy yourselves with the building code.
All right, thank you very much.
Right, next item is a consent item. We have minutes of the special meeting of Building Appeals Board, August 30th and September 26th. So that's a vote?
Vote?
Yes.
Okay, Bob Daddy,
Aye.
Tom
Aye.
Farmer,
Aye.
and myself, aye, so it passes.
That was to approve the minutes for the August 30th and 2021.
You know,
and
actually, even though we've approved it, I just really have, I have about 4 questions, perhaps. So, and this relates to the August 30th minutes, and particular on page 2, starting at page 2 of 3 and 3 of 3, the enumerated motions. The item number 6 is replacement of all plastic skylights with tempered glass skylights. Is it the intention that that would apply or to like solar tube skylights, or would they be exempted?
I would hope solar tubes. What I'm looking at is when you have the width where a fireman can fall from the roof in.
Yeah.
With a solar tube, I've not seen those things maybe bigger than 12 inches, certainly not bigger than 16, because they're going to go between the
Rafters.
joists, right?
Rafters.
And so, no, I'm looking at those 2x2s and bigger.
Well, though still, that's a function of how it's interpreted by the building official.
Can I ask something though? Are those solar tubes plastic or they're glass?
They're plastic. They can't make them, I guess, from a perspective of economics and everything else, having a dome that's,
I understand, but then what about the fire hardening?
Honestly, my request on that was not about fire hardening on that.
Well,
It
yeah,
was really about human safety.
No, I
was my big
understand.
concern.
And also a 2x4 larger plastic skylight, 3x3, whatever it is, embers are going to melt into that thing if they're flying and open it up effectively, open up the interior of the house or the structure. But I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about the interpretation by the building official of the meaning of that element as far as fire hardening and whether it's applicable to solar tubes. Because solar tubes do make two sizes. I believe there's 12 and 20. You can get a 20. But
those are round, and therefore
And
the
dome.
embers would not have a propensity to accumulate on a flatter surface.
And don't they have a metal tube inside?
yeah, it's
Oh,
polished.
Okay, so
metal,
then that
yeah.
helps, okay. So you asked a question.
Mhm.
So this list is for fire hardening, just as a correction. This list was fire hardening. I'm addressing Mr. Daddy's thoughts. The way that I have interpreted it is that if there is a rating that meets the solar tube or solar skylight, however we want to call it, that would have to meet the minimum standards of Chapter 7A, and the listing of it would say that, 7A or R337 of the building code.
Okay, but we don't know. How it would comply. But if it doesn't say it,
Then it wouldn't be allowed to be installed. Does that make sense?
is that something we can look into?
And so what I heard was those would have to have glass. They would not be allowed to have acrylic.
They don't make them in glass,
I know that.
so. And they're very effective at bringing light into yeah. And I haven't seen one damaged by ember or so on and so forth, but the issue is still whether if it, according to Mr. Jeswiak, if it doesn't have a rating, then it's not going to be approved, and that's, I think that might be subverting the intent of the fire hardening relative to the benefits. So, okay.
In English, does that mean that solar tubes that are acrylic should no longer exist?
No, I think that they're beneficial and would be worthy of an exemption. If
Okay.
it requires an exemption, that's what I'm saying, because they,
It's a mechanism to allow 'em. We need to explore how we do that.
yeah, because if, once again, if as Mr. Jeswiak indicated, if they have a rating, and that would be presuming Solatube, SOLATUBE, is a brand, I presume, a trademark. However, there are other companies that make similar devices, and the issue is going to be just like anything else, whether it has a rating, great, then that's the company's responsibility. If they don't have a rating, none of them comply, then that's an issue that I would like to address with an exemption of some sort. Okay? Then number 9, installation of 3 communicating smoke alarms placed one each in attic, garage, and central interior room of residence. I was under the impression that was heat rise device, not smoke alarm. Certainly a smoke alarm in a garage is gonna potentially go off when we don't want them, and now if they're communicating, you're gonna have 3 going off.
Which number were you referring to? again, sorry?
Item 9 on page 3 of 3.
Correct. So it was at the time of that meeting, it was requested that there be a intercommunicated smoke alarm system, one in the attic, one in the garage, and one in central interior room. That was the request. Now, the I had provided reasonings that wouldn't be a good idea from because of the heat and moisture. That's why we don't put those in garages and attics.
And attics, I agree.
Correct.
So, and my understanding was that was for a heat rise device. In other words,
We have
Heat
the
detector.
heat sensor, the
Yeah.
heat detector. We have those in the garage currently. Those are required in the garage currently.
Right.
This specifically, for this list was going to council for review. Or requested that it go to council. And that's where it was requested that it was
I don't.
smoke alarms.
Right, I don't see that as being, I don't see a good outcome from that. I don't see a good rationale for supporting that. So, is anybody, that may be just my recollection, but, or false recollection, but I'm not in support of that.
What about a heat alarm? I mean, like,
Well, a heat sensor,
Yeah,
that's
so
what that's.
can we replace that from smoke alarms to a heat sensor?
They're already required in the garage, and putting one up in the attic is an appropriate location for them. And the notion of a central interior room of a residence is, I don't think, a priority, but that's okay too, and communicating is a good thing. But I don't see that two of those three locations, smoke alarms are not a good place,
I agree.
so.
Because the attic gets too hot.
No,
And the
Soot,
moisture
dust.
and the dust.
Dust, somebody could throw something down in an attic where you have one, and the dust kicked up can set it off, and now you got three of them going off.
But it's so nice
well,
when
not
you
if it was
communicate.
heat. It wouldn't pick up particles if it was heat.
Well, but it says a smoke alarm instead
Yeah.
of a heat sensor or heat detector or heat rise device. So all I'm saying is number 9 is not,
So
I
you're thinking
don't
we ought to
believe
have-
it was our intent.
Heat sensor.
But
It's
I don't know, communicating, I think, is good. I know of a woman who lost her house because the alarm went off in the garage, and she was in the back room, and she didn't know it. The house
Right,
burned down.
Right, but that's, and that, if there's a fire in the garage, and we have it in the code requiring that, that's a heat rise device, not a smoke detector.
Mm-hmm.
Because smoke is very common in garages.
Right. But no, that's what I'm saying, is why don't we have a heat detector and not a smoke?
That's what I'm saying,
Is that what you're saying?
exactly
So
what
I-
I'm saying.
Oh, I'm so
I
happy.
just want to correct one thing. These are the minutes. We're not adjusting these. These are what was said at the meeting.
I got it.
So-
No, that's why I was
but-
okay with approving them.
Okay,
I'm just falling back to say, that isn't, I don't believe that was our intent.
okay, let me ask this. Are we talking code adoption right now, or are we talking minutes?
No, talking minutes.
We're talking minutes, but I think we'd like to.
But the minutes were approved, and now we're going back and, so that's why I'm confused. So are we gonna approve these minutes, and then we could discuss,
We've already approved the minutes.
okay, when I was trying to clarify for the record that the minutes for the August 30th, 2021, and the September 26th, 2022 meetings, the minutes are approved.
Yes.
correct.
Okay. So now, we're moving on to code adoption, where we can make these changes and add those into,
And they're so nicely
I 100% agree.
enumerated here.
I just
and
wanted,
that
I
could-
wanted to get to the point where we introduced the new item,
Yes,
because that's where
okay.
I was confused. I
Fine.
apologize.
Okay,
No,
And-
she made me say aye to the minute.
yes, yes.
She did,
we've all-
yes.
Okay, so having, okay, and then moving along, since we've raised that one. Item 12, the city would apply a program to itself related to wood chipping. Now, that is, the city itself will apply to itself the program regarding wood chipping.
Why is that in Title IX? Why does that qualify to be in Title IX?
I don't know, because this is from August 30th.
Isn't it fire hardening? Isn't that part of fire
Yes,
hardening?
yeah,
But,
clearance,
but
yes.
we're
Effectively
part of
clearance.
building code, and I don't see where wood chipping has got anything to do with construction components, building.
Fire clearance. That's what this related to, as I recall.
Yeah,
Fire clearance.
why did you don't,
Is that, we have the authority under Title IX for fire clearance?
it's part of fire hardening,
wood
as I
chipping?
understand it.
I mean, we had somebody that dropped off a giant load of wood chips in their front yard, which is gonna become, when the embers hit that thing,
Right.
it's just gonna be 5 million extra little sparks flying up, right?
Okay, it was just a question, okay, so, in any case, and that was actually the sum total of my,
Cool.
those, three items, so.
With that, we recommend that we, Tom, I'm sure you have some items in here that are of concern and maybe you think might help clarify some items for us.
Are we still on a year ago minutes?
No, the minutes are over.
The-
No, I'm talking about the code as proposed.
Okay, well, let's go to the next item then. The consent items 1 and 2 we've approved at this particular point. Now we're going to the discussion items. Tonight's discussion items is amendments to the 2022 California Building Code. So, provide a recommendation to City Council regarding amendments to the California Building Code. And we kind of got started with some of these, and now we get to finish, so.
Okay, Chair, if you so desire, I can point you to the direction. We'll start off with the heat sensor, because that's the first part in the residential code. So we can add that portion of the heat sensor on page 13 of 20. Of attachment A,
15
sorry.
of 20.
Yep. Actually, go to 14 of 20, my apologies, because that's where required. So, in that section, you could see, R 314.9.2. There is no code language, current code language under the state code requiring a heat sensor. That's a local amendment. So where the proposed Ojai language would include, heat sensor detectors shall be installed within an attached and unattached garages when a permit is issued with a valuation greater than $500. In that section, we can add in attics also.
Okay, with a $500 valuation, I think from my perspective, having gone through the exercise of ordering one and installing one, et cetera, $500 for a heat sensor in one location, certainly in a garage, is not an egregious imposition.
That's not how I'm reading this. It's if somebody is doing $500 or more work, then you have to put that in. It has nothing to do with the cost of the sensor itself.
No, what I was referencing is for $500 worth of work on a permit, the additional cost of a heat sensor in the garage was, I don't think is onerous or egregious. However, once you start putting them in 3 places in total, one in the garage, one in the attic, and one in a central location, now we got some, especially if they're communicating. And I'm gonna presume communicating is hardwired, not wireless. That is now a significant expense. That would eclipse the $500.
I would also have to check to see if they can be interconnected. I'm not 100% sure that heat sensors can be interconnected.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's necessary that they do, so that's was also my concern with communicating, because having a house with that is fitted with a communicating smoke. Actually, it's dual systems, because there's one that's a security system, and then there's the one that's the part of the electrical system. When they start communicating to each other, because one of them's triggered by dust or by age or by anything, pretty soon the one is driven out of the home, and it always seems to happen in the middle of the night when it's cold outside. So
Imagine
I
trying to
wouldn't
climb
like
up-
that to make the heat rise issue, which is a very beneficial relative to certainly the attic and certainly a garage. A lot of fires get started there, and a lot of fires that are involved in those particular locations turn into something much worse. But I don't see going past just the one in the garage for a $500 permit. That's all.
Okay, so Dale brought this up about 2 years ago. And so I went out and bought them, and I brought her the box and said, okay, for around $100, I was able to get 3 communicating wireless, 10-year warranty on the battery.
Lithium battery, yeah.
So, I mean, I had a loss, a month after the Thomas fire. In the garage, cigarette, smoldered, goes on for 2 or 3 hours. They're in the back. The neighbors got to come in and, you know, beat out the windows and rouse the people out of their home. And it was at a time they were repaving the street. So there were no hydrant markers in the street, and the firemen couldn't find a fire hydrant. And so we lose 2 cars, and that was $1 million loss for want of something that would let the people in the very back of the house, 50 feet away, know that their garage and their 2 cars were on
Okay,
fire.
and hence the interest then in having one in a central room.
Right.
Just,
But I don't really want to do the hardwired. I think
Okay,
we're
then
getting
we need to be
good
very
enough.
specific
Well,
about this.
One point is, the very next section requires that they be connected
Power source,
to a
yeah.
power source. A lot of these older houses do not have power in the
The
attic,
garage, yes.
so they would have to run electric to the attic. Just letting you know.
Yeah,
And that's the reason that I think our state of electronics with the Bluetooth and all the other things we have, it's kind of one of these things where having a failure everything at one time, not being able to communicate, having the battery run out of one of them or all 3 simultaneously, I think that it is probably worthwhile for health and safety. That's all.
well, the only concern with anything though that's both battery and Bluetooth is that, yeah, somehow the system isn't going to communicate, the battery runs down, and it's not communicating to the other one so that it's audible, because you're not going to necessarily hear something up in an attic. This is starting to get into a place where the intent may be good, but the actual execution might not result in desirable effect.
Another point, putting it in a centrally located room, it's going to be on the ceiling. And we don't have receptacles on the ceiling in many of these houses. So putting it on the ceiling, you plug it in, you have to run another receptacle there. Additionally, if they are wirelessly interconnected and the power goes out, they will not communicate because your router is down.
Yeah,
But can I ask, though, aren't we talking about unusual situations for the most part? Wouldn't they be effective? I mean, you can always create some idea about, well, it won't work if this or that.
I think it's like this. Every year I get gigged by the fire department for $75 to recharge my extinguisher.
Yeah.
And I told my girls, if we have a fire, get out. I don't want you fighting it anyhow.
Right.
And it's still a requirement to have that 75. I got to have it recharged every year, or I could just throw it in the trash and buy a new one. It's just an extra layer. If you don't think we need it, that's cool. I'll pay $1 million for the next house that doesn't have it.
No.
When the fire starts.
But we're talking about the garage, which we already have.
Right.
Now we're
Except
talking
you can't
about,
hear in the back. That's the issue.
okay, but Anything in an attic is not gonna be, it's not like in a garage where you can see it, where it's easy to service or access. Anything in an attic is going to be the weak link to this arrangement. Having it, another one in a central location, once again, where it's on a roof, on a ceiling, and it's, visually accessible, it's accessible for maintenance. If it's going off and because of a low battery or some other reason, communication-wise, it'll be something that will bother people enough that they'll address it. Attic, I don't know that's gonna happen. I don't think effectively, anyway. The only time I've known of heat detectors, heat rise detectors in an attic being feasible is when somebody put them there and they're hardwired. They're part of the system.
Okay, well,
And there's a cost associated with, obviously,
and I think
what Tom
that's,
said.
and I think that's a lot of cost.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying for $500, permit, even if you made it 3 times that and made it a $1,500 permit, because running power to 3 locations in an older home is.
So then is it just a matter of we're just negotiating price? And so if that number had a 0 and it were $5,000, at what number of remodel and retrofit then? Does it make sense to say, hey, you're spending, is it the $25,000 number? It's not that they're not good. It's not that they won't help. It's not that they won't do the job. And we're talking about 500. Is it, do we come in at that 25,000 level and say, at 25,000, this is an easy, doable thing?
Yeah, to me, when you're getting into something that's extensive enough, because this is, I know if I learned that this was a requirement for a relatively minor, even at $25,000 price point, a relatively minor remodel, I'd be looking at it at being a substantial complication.
But, so at $25,000, we're supposed to do 20% of fire hardening. Isn't this fire hardening? So we're already there at 25,000.
Well, fire hardening, I think within the context of what we're looking at is from a wildland or an exterior fire source. This is addressing something that
I see.
occurs from within
Within
the
the house.
structure, and it's a little bit, it's more of a fire life safety.
Can I suggest?
Yes,
Yes.
Something?
absolutely.
We're waiting.
Okay. I think we're all in agreement that $500 we can put it in the garage because there's already a receptacle there. So then let's add another line and put a value to require that they be in the attic at a separate value.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
So we could do it that way, and if we break it up that way, 50,000, 25,000, whatever you guys, valuation, I think that's more reasonable.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's kind of a compromise between because the $500 and putting it in the garage is
Yeah.
fairly easy. Everybody has a receptacle on the ceiling because they have a garage opener. When you have to now go into the attic and those two have to talk to each other, that is gonna be a little bit more complicated because you have to either connect a wire, a data cable between them so that they both go off. Again, they're both in locations that are not convenient. So, but also putting a heat sensor in the middle of your house, I don't think is necessarily appropriate in my opinion. Maybe put in a speaker that connects when those two go off.
Yeah.
I'm just,
Yeah, I see. I think at this point the question really is whether the requirement for an attic is heat. Yeah, heat is whether an attic is going to be is feasible at this point, unless somebody's doing a real major remodel.
And what's the definition of real major?
To me, that would be probably in the vicinity of $50,000 or more.
I would make a motion that we go ahead and we stipulate that when somebody is doing a $50,000 job, then that they put in the attic.
Okay, because they're already going to have to do
Communicating in
one
the
for the, one for the garage, so, okay. Does that, you see any downsides in that?
Just the one point that everybody has talked about is nobody's going to hear it in the attic, nobody's going to hear it in the garage, in the back bedroom. So even if they're interconnected, that you may not hear both. So that's just my
Yeah.
my thought about it. So
Well, can't you put it in the garage toward the back part, I mean, in the attic toward, far away from the garage so that it's in the house farther along, so you would hear it?
Well,
Don't
the
they
issue
make a
is,
lot of
if it's, it really is, and this is with Bob's real-world scenario of the loss, is if people are in the end of the house and it's a family environment and there's a television on and there's noise, family noise, you're certainly not gonna hear, even if they're connected, the attic and the garage, they're both remote enough locations that
But
you're
don't
not
they
gonna
make
hear.
a lot of noise?
Well, but in an attic with, you've got
muffled?
insulation up there, very muffled. Out in the
Okay.
garage, once again, if that garage is by the street and the,
No, I see what
where
you mean.
everyone's, is communing in the, back of the house, there's enough separation, they're really not gonna hear it. And the other issue really is, I mean, the whole purpose of this is to warn.
To warn.
And the notion of using a speaker or even a small horn or something like that, which they use in warning and security systems, the issue with that one is that could work just fine, a small little horn. And they've got all sorts of devices like that that exist. They also have a tendency of not being typically in residential installations. And they also typically get painted over and all sorts of things because they're not going.
I withdraw my motion for the, for the interest of time.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next section.
But we do have to think about this. I mean,
I'm gonna just throw another one out there for you, just because I can. Interconnecting a detached garage and an attic. Just gonna say that.
okay, thank you
Yeah,
so
that's
much.
that's another issue.
So it can be done, but
Yeah.
now you're adding trenching and
Yeah, I think to me, right now, we've made an incremental improvement. I don't know that I'm gonna leave that to the next, I would suggest that we leave that one to the next cycle.
so leave it as is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, moving right along.
Okay.
Beat that to death.
Well,
And
Health and safety
I'm
stuff
glad
is
we and I'm
worthwhile
glad we
doing.
did beat it to death, because it's our job to explore those things that we need to do to enhance safety.
And this is the time to have the discussion, everybody have the understanding of what everybody else is thinking about everything. So I commend you on that. Let's, and then we'll talk about the, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, we'll talk about the solar tubes.
okay.
So that's gonna be under Windows. I gotta find the section.
What page is that?
We're looking.
He's looking.
I do not see any modifications to that section.
No,
We don't have a local amendment to that.
right.
So we would have to add one to that section to exclude, I'll have to get the technical name for it.
Exempt solar tubes.
Yes, I'll have to get the technical name,
Okay, right?
but
Is that going to be under R 337.11.2 on 17 of 20? where it goes in, we're kind of in the same area. We've got the spark arrestor, we've got the vents,
There's a section specifically for
windows for glazing.
windows and glazing.
Okay.
But I'll just put a note in here to add a section to exempt solar tubes. And then I just want to go back to that list on that agenda item, or excuse me, the minutes. Make sure we. Then it was wood chips. Heat sensors, solar tubes. Was there a fourth one?
No,
Okay, I thought you had said four. Okay, so as of right now, as we stand right now, the only thing we're adding is the exception for solar tubes. Okay. Next.
right? Next.
Good with the rest.
Yes.
What about, I mean, maybe I'm skipping along, but the refunds, 80% of,
Okay.
why do we?
I can explain the refunds. So our 108.5, which is on page 12
Of 20?
20.
Yeah, okay.
And then there's also, I think it's the same section in
109.6, I think, too.
109.6 that's the California Building Code, the residential code. They say the same thing. So the way this works is the building official, if there is an erroneously paid fee or excessive fees paid, the building official can authorize the repayment of that, of the amount that was overpaid or erroneously paid. That's part one. Part two is the building official may authorize a refund of not more than 80% of the applicable permit fees, okay, that's key, when no work has been done under the permit. So let's say you do a remodel on a house. You submit plans, goes through plan check. You reissue the permit. You get a building permit, plumbing, mechanical, and electrical permits. You will get, and then you decide we're not doing this. You will get 80% of the permit fees of the building, plumbing, mechanical, electrical back. Okay, 80%. You won't collect any of the other fees associated, i.e. the plan check fee, the issuance fee, all that work's been done. So you won't collect against that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it has been done, the work has been done.
So the work's been done by the city to get to that point, and then the city keeps another 20% of the permit fees, and you get 80% of those fees back. So you're not gonna get 100%, but you get something back. If you have, how does this work? If you have called us out and we passed an inspection, and then you say, you know what, I'm not putting up this patio cover anymore, you don't get any money back. You've called out for an inspection, exactly. And then, if it exceeds 180 days and you haven't done any work, you still get no money back.
No money back.
No money back. So you have 6 months to decide whether you're gonna start that project. If not, it's either canceled or you do the project. You have another 6 months to do the project and then ask for an extension, as described in, sorry, I don't have these codes memorized off the top of my head. That's refund. In expiration, 105.5. Does that answer those questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what about if you were charged a fee that was never authorized and wasn't applicable? What kind of time do you have?
So if you were, so that there
So
wouldn't.
you were charged a special historic reconnaissance fee of a couple of $1,000, like our prior speaker, only to find that there was no significant interest. It wasn't historic. It really wasn't necessary. How long can that person, how long do they have to apply to get their $2,000 back?
We're talking about building fees and building fees only.
Okay.
This
is gonna be
applies to
separate.
building fees.
Okay. So that's up to the city council.
I'm not sure how that fee schedule works.
Well, that's okay. It's gonna get recycled. It's coming around again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good with this process.
Did you want to go over the section that I have proposed to be added?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to look at 337, R337?
Page.
16 of 20.
Okay.
And this applies to both building code and residential code. I just went to residential code. It says the exact same thing in the building code. Last time we discussed, there were some questions about R337.1.1, which talks about valuations. And as I said last meeting, I am open to change the valuation level of that as you so desire. I just put a number down. So I think this is a good way. You know, we talk about not being able to get these older houses into compliance, and this is how we can do it. It's similar to what we do with accessibility.
Tom, when it comes to valuation, I don't want to really split hairs on this amount of money. We'll have somebody build a home. People have actually built homes here in the last 10 years.
Approximately
And
1 year.
I'll go look at one, and when I get done looking at it for value, for replacement, it's absolutely got nosebleed numbers. When I go into the city and I pull the permit, I'm going, you're 200% off of what the actual cost. Not you. You weren't even here at the time. We're 200% off. And what they said is, well, we use some kind of guide.
Yes.
You know, when you have a permit fee of $2 million, and the result comes in at 5.5 million, that's, I don't think we're using the right guide.
Okay.
So how do we do that? Because 25,000 now, I mean, gee whiz, you can barely buy a load of copper pipe, or, you know, it's nosebleed now.
I know what you're saying. Okay. So let me explain how valuation is calculated. We calculate valuation off the International Code Council valuation table that is released every February and August. And so we use the most current one, and we go based off of occupancy type. A residence is R3. Construction type, most houses are built what's called 5B. That's your standard stick home. And then we take that price per square foot and multiply that by the number of square feet. That's how we calculate valuation. And then we add the garage in, and then any other possible occupancies that may be there, storage, anything like that. That's how we calculate valuation. Now, valuation, we have to look at apples to apples when it comes to houses. We have to look at, we can't, so the best way I can describe it is as inspection and as construction, there is no difference between a Kenmore and a Viking stove, right? The values of those, we could all agree, are much higher. But as a building official, we see it as a stove, and that has a certain value. The inspection time that it takes for that to be installed and inspected. That's what we're looking at. Now, you can also look at flooring. Flooring doesn't require permits, right? Changing your floor from carpet to hardwood does not require a permit. Cabinetry does not require a permit. Okay?
Plumbing does.
The plumbing in the cabinetry does. The electricity in the cabinetry does, but the actual physical cabinets don't. Okay? So that's what we do. That's how we calculate valuation. It's the most fair way to calculate things and take out the what's the word I'm looking for? The value of the actual materials, because it's taken on an average.
Okay,
Okay.
right? Okay, so we're at this point, I just really, I think everything looks pretty straightforward. The exceptions I'm looking at this point, which is on page 17 of 20. And the exception 1, alterations made for the sole purpose of retrofitting an older building to comply with section R337 as amended by the city of Ojai. It's pretty, that's an exception to the
An older building.
$25,000 requirement.
Correct, because 100% of that project is to
Exactly. So it's
do
not
the
like
upgrade.
saying,
So
then give us another 20%.
give us
on
another
it.
20. Yeah.
Right. Okay, window changeouts, that's fairly straightforward as well, and should be. Projects involving only plumbing, mechanical, or electrical work, once again, that's upgrading and retrofitting without substantially changing the structure to the point that would justify a fire hardening retrofit. And then projects involving only voluntary seismic. Give me an example of what you're thinking of as involuntary seismic retrofit is when an engineer is said in order to do a remodel, you got to do this.
Well, the remodel would then trigger that.
Right.
So if let's say you had a soft story building and you were going in and shoring that up, that would be it's voluntary to be doing that. Then that
This
would
really
be
just goes to the evaluation anyway, so I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, then we have an R337 dot 11.2, required retrofits. We've gone over all of this in the past, so I think that's pretty, but I do have a question about D. Roof gutters shall comply with, what does it look like when roof gutters comply with section R337.5.4?
they have the leaf covers over the top.
Oh, yeah.
And leaf covers from
A fire aspect.
no, I was going for what in an expense aspect.
Big time.
Yes.
Well, depends. Technically, you can get that roll of screen that goes over the top of it. It's a screen cover,
Right.
so that would comply. So
Because it's a non-combustible metal screen.
cover, yep.
And you think it's a lot more than that because?
I'll give you the rolls that I bought because when I took them out, they don't shape real well and they don't fit in there. They don't stand there.
Turn them the other way.
And it's like, that was a waste. I tried it. It didn't work.
Really?
So, yeah, that
So
wasn't
you're-
good for me.
Okay. But at this point, it's not.
It's important.
Yes,
Accumulation of leaves, anything on the roof, and it's right on the house.
right.
And most of the houses,
And it-
except for mine, have got wood fascia, where the rain gutters are. I don't have any exterior wood on my house, but
Okay.
not very many people.
So but once again, it doesn't have to look good. All it has to do is prevent the accumulation of leaves. And even if there's dips in the ugly wire that gets put up there, it's not too visible from the ground. And even though, even with dips, it might allow some leaves to go there, and stay, it's pretty easy to remove them because of the screen, whether it's beautifully level or not. So the notion here is it can be done at a relatively minimal expense, and you can't see it from my house or anybody else's house. Okay?
Unless you have a two-story house and
Yeah.
a single story next door,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah, so.
but still.
okay. Right, so that just clarified what the minimum requirements were for me, and that was really my only question. Anybody else got anything? Okay, and then the last one is if the minimum fire hardening requirements does not meet or exceed the 20% evaluation, additional fire hardening items are to be proposed and approved by the building official. What would you, typically speaking, what category of improvements or fire hardening items would you?
Well, I mean, you know, if you're doing a whole exterior remodel and you have wood siding, I mean, if you're doing an interior remodel and your valuation is, you know, exorbitant, then that 20% is not going to cover that. You have wood siding, change it to the T111 or something like that that is more compliant.
And is that something, though, that could be done in places, in parts of it?
Portions,
versus
yeah,
portions?
portions, the whole thing.
Okay.
And then over time doing projects will then,
Yeah, it can
Yeah.
continue or complete.
I would have to work, you know, I wouldn't say like, oh, you know, you got to do 4 feet here. You know what I mean? If it's infeasible to do anything else beyond that 20%, then it's infeasible. I'm not going to make a, you know, $100 more is one thing, but $10,000 more is another.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and then if somebody had a problem with that, something tells me that they could wind up appealing it to the Building Appeals Board.
That
Okay.
is always a possibility.
All right, anything else then? Anybody else got anything relative to these? Okay,
Are we, okay. So let me ask you this. So the only change that I see is just adding that exception to this code.
yeah.
Okay. I'll let you make a motion and then I'll ask a question.
I'll make a motion that we recommend adoption to the city council as modified.
All in favor?
Second?
It has to be a roll call.
Okay. Is there a second to
There's a
the
second.
motion?
I have a second.
You have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Roll call. Bob Daddy?
Aye.
Tom?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Okay. So I'll just add that one to what we have here. I will add that one, I'll have to add a section for glazing and then put in proposed, and then just add the exception for the generic term for solar tubes, because I believe that is a,
It is.
Yeah, it's a special name.
Light emitting roof fixture.
right,
Yeah, but-
light
The
reflecting
notion being
solar.
we shouldn't prevent people from using them because they're not only beneficial as far as not using electric lighting during the day where those are installed, but they have some other, benefits relative to sunlight in being let into interior rooms, closets, bathrooms, whatever, and we shouldn't restrict those unduly. And I think you can figure out how to exempt that adequately, so,
Are
very
you
good.
saying that there's, none of them are made with glass covers? Is that the problem?
None that I've ever seen,
Well, why is that so hard?
The glass is expensive.
and
it's
especially make a
expensive.
perfect dome,
Yeah,
and there's
can't
also
see.
another consideration, and the plastic has it can let light in,
Yeah.
and then coupled with the polished tube, I have several in my home, and.
I understand how the polished tube would
Okay.
increase the light.
But when you use glass, you introduce a heat gain that would not be desirable,
I see.
because glass has a tendency of concentrating the light waves, that plastic doesn't as much, anyway.
So there's no such
But-
thing as,
You're taking also
Fireproof
what is like
plastic.
a $300 or $400 assembly,
yeah.
and that glass would be by itself potentially that kind of number. So you're gonna double or make them so that they're not as practicable from the perspective of simply a cost benefit,
Okay. Okay.
anyway, in my opinion. All right, very good. I'm going to call this meeting of the Ojai Building Appeals Board adjourned at 6:28.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We only got one little modification. Excellent. But you can't take everything, right? So, you know, I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, why not